Fox News alert. President Biden with reporters last night, firing back at that damaging special counsel report that highlights his, quote, diminished faculties.
In his description, you are a well-meaning elderly man with a poor memory.
I'm well-meaning, and I'm an elderly man, and I know what the hell I'm doing. I've been president. I put this country back on its feet.
But moments later, another gaffe. Biden mixing up Mexico and Egypt while talking about the situation in Gaza.
As you know, initially, the president of Mexico, Sisi, did not want to open up the gate to allow humanitarian material to get in.
Wow. Joining us now with reaction, former Whitewater Deputy Independent Counsel Saul Wisenberg, along with Fox News contributor and former House Oversight Committee Chairman Jason Chaffetz. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining the program. Counselor, I'll start with you. The report was stunning. Talk about the legal strategy that the president may have, because the special counsel essentially said he's not fit for trial. How do you defend yourself with that?
Well, that's not a legal strategy. He doesn't need to have a legal strategy when the special prosecutor says we're not going to indict him because he doesn't, his mental capacity is so limited a jury would be sympathetic to him. What I thought was significant about last night from a legal perspective is that unfortunately the president came out and lied about what the special counsel found. The president the special counsel said there is evidence that Biden willfully retained and disclosed classified information when he was a private citizen. Willful is important in this context. Willfully means not only were you deliberately doing it, but you knew it was in violation of the law. Now, the special counsel also said, we don't think a jury would necessarily convict him, and one of the big reasons is they would have great sympathy for him because of his mental decline. Those weren't his exact words, but that's in effect what he said. So that's how I view that. The president very clearly lied about that and other things last night, but he doesn't need to have a legal strategy because he's gotten a free pass.
Yeah. Jason, let's talk about the politics, and let's start with what the special counsel said in his report. He said he did not remember when he was vice president forgetting on the first day of the interview when his term ended, and forgetting on the second day of the interview when his term began. He did not remember even within several years when his son Beau died. If he's not remembering those things, how can he even remember the nuclear codes, what his foreign policy is, how to secure the border, how to tackle crime? I mean, what are the politics of this? How can he be president?
Well, we need a president that knows how to negotiate and not just negotiate with, a teleprompter and walking up and back to the podium, but who is a grasp of the facts. And he demonstrated at the very press conference, trying to show that, hey, I do have the mental capacity to do this. And then he makes the big gaffe. I think there's a huge question for the Attorney General of the United States. Do you believe the special prosecutor that the president cannot remember basic facts about his own life? Yeah. Or do you believe the president who says he is mentally fit? And if he is mentally fit, then why not charge him? This is the recommendation that goes to the Attorney General. The Attorney General can move it a different direction. So, Mr. Attorney General, do you believe the president that he is mentally fit? Or do you believe the special counsel who says he can't even remember the basic facts about his life?
It's very easy to get to the bottom of this. Just release the tape of the interview and let the American people decide on it. I want to move on to another Fox News alert. The Supreme Court is primed to keep the Trump on the Colorado ballot in a blockbuster hearing where the liberal justices expressed deep concern. Counselor, where do you see this going? This could be, not even a split decision.
Oh, I think without question, the Supreme Court is going to reverse the Colorado Supreme Court, and the U.S. Supreme Court is going to reverse the Colorado Supreme Court. They're going to make it clear that no one state can take President Trump or any other presidential candidate off the ballot. And I think it's going to be at least an 8-1 decision with Sotomayor in dissent, or even potentially 9-0. Now, it will be on a narrow enough ground for Chief Justice Roberts to get that much agreement. But that's definitely going to be overturned, what Colorado did.
Yeah, we'll be following it. Gentlemen, thank you so much.
I'm Steve Ducey.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.